Somewhere on the Horn of Africa, a stretch of coastline barely 500 miles long has become the most quietly contested piece of real estate on the planet. On one side, a NATO member with the second largest army in the Western Alliance is pouring billions into military bases, port infrastructure, and political influence. On the other, a nation smaller than New Jersey just made a diplomatic move so aggressive that it sent shockwaves from Ankara to Doha to Washington. And caught in the middle is a country most people couldn't find on a map, a country that hasn't had a fully functioning central government in over 3 decades, a country that controls access to one of the most critical choke points in global trade. This isn't a regional dispute. This is a collision between two entirely different visions of the future. And the outcome will determine who controls the flow of goods, energy, and military power across an ocean. This is the story of why Somalia, a nation often dismissed as a failed state, has suddenly become the center of a geopolitical chess match between Israel and Turkey. It's a story about deep water ports, undersea cables, military installations, drone bases, and trade corridors worth trillions of dollars. It's about two rising powers racing to lock down strategic positions before the other can. And it involves a breakaway territory that no country on Earth officially recognized for over 30 years, until one country decided to change that, and in doing so, triggered a chain reaction that is still unfolding right now. What you're about to hear goes far deeper than what the headlines have told you. There are hidden alliances, each billion-dollar infrastructure gambles and military calculations that most analysts are only beginning to piece together. If you're fascinated by mega-scale geopolitical engineering and the hidden infrastructure shaping our future, subscribe to NextBlueprint like this video, and drop a comment telling us where you think this is all heading. To understand why Somalia matters so much, you need to understand one body of water: the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's a narrow passage barely 20 miles wide that sits between the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Every single day, roughly 6.5 million barrels of oil pass through it. Container ships carrying electronics from China, grain from India, manufactured goods from Southeast Asia. All of it funnels through this strait on its way to the Suez Canal and then onward to Europe. By some estimates, nearly a third of global maritime trade depends on uninterrupted passage through this corridor. If you control the coastline flanking that strait, you don't just have a military position. You have leverage over the global economy. Somalia and its breakaway region Somaliland sit directly on the southern shore of the Gulf of Aden, staring across the water at Yemen. This is not some abstract strategic interest. This is the physical infrastructure backbone of international commerce. Whoever builds the ports, controls the naval access, and maintains the security architecture along this coastline effectively holds a key to the world's supply chain. And right now, two countries are racing to be that gatekeeper. Turkey understood this years ago. Its engagement with Somalia stretches back over a decade. So I'm beginning with humanitarian aid during the devastating 2011 famine and evolving steadily into something far more ambitious. Ankara didn't just send food and medicine. It sent engineers, military trainers, construction crews, and diplomats. Turkey built roads in Mogadishu. It renovated the Aden Abdullah International Airport. It constructed one of the largest overseas military bases in its modern history, Camp Turksam, which sits on the outskirts of the Somali capital and trains thousands of Somali National Army soldiers every year. This was not charity. This was strategic positioning disguised as goodwill, and it worked brilliantly. Israel, on the other hand, took a very different approach. For years, its interest in the Horn of Africa was quiet, conducted largely through intelligence channels, quiet arms relationships, and behind-the-scenes engagement with Somaliland, the self-declared republic in the northwest that broke away from Somalia in 1991. While the rest of the world looked the other way, Somaliland built something remarkable. It held democratic elections, established a functioning parliament, maintained its own military and currency, and kept relative peace and stability in a region defined by chaos. It was a functioning state in everything but name. And Israel saw an opportunity that nobody else was willing to take. On December 26th, Israel did something no other country had dared to do. It formally recognized Somaliland as an independent state. The agreement signed between the two governments wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It included frameworks for cooperation in agriculture, technology, trade, and most critically, security coordination. In Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, celebrations erupted. Fireworks lit the sky. Flags waved in the streets. For a population that had spent more than 30 years building a democracy that nobody acknowledged, this was a moment of profound validation. But let's be clear about what this recognition actually means in strategic terms. Israel didn't just gain a diplomatic ally. It gained a potential foothold on one of the most important coastlines in the world. Somaliland's Berbera port, which has already been significantly upgraded with investment from the United Arab Emirates through a deal with DP World, is one of the finest deepwater harbors on the Gulf of Aden. With the right security agreements and further infrastructure investment, Berbera could become a critical node in a Western-aligned maritime security network. It could serve as a counterweight to the growing influence of rival powers on both sides of the Strait. The timing of this recognition was anything but accidental. Just days before, Israel had hosted the 10th Israel-Greece-Cyprus Trilateral Summit in Jerusalem, a meeting that produced sweeping agreements on energy cooperation, joint naval exercises, missile defense alignment, and discussions directly related to the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. That corridor, sometimes called IMEC, is an American-backed initiative designed to create a trade route linking India to Europe through the Gulf states and Israel, deliberately bypassing both Turkey and China's Belt and Road Initiative. When you connect these dots, a pattern emerges. Israel is not making isolated diplomatic moves. It is constructing an integrated strategic architecture that stretches from the eastern Mediterranean to the Horn of Africa, designed to secure trade routes, limit rival influence, and position itself as an indispensable node in the future of global commerce. Some experts believe this represents the most ambitious Israeli foreign policy expansion in decades. Critics argue it's a dangerous overreach that could drag Israel into conflicts far from its borders. But one thing is undeniable. The chessboard has fundamentally changed. If that surprised you, hit like, because this is only the beginning. To understand why Turkey reacted so furiously to Israel's recognition of Somaliland, you need to understand what Turkey has been building in Somalia and why it matters so much to Ankara's larger ambitions. Turkey's presence in Somalia is not a side project. It is a cornerstone of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's vision for a resurgent Turkey that leads the Muslim world and reclaims the influence once held by the Ottoman Empire across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Somalia is central to this vision for several reasons. It offers direct access to the Indian Ocean. It provides a launchpad for Turkish commercial and military influence across East Africa. And its government, which claims sovereignty over Somaliland, is deeply aligned with Turkey's political and ideological network. Camp Turksam, Turkey's military base in Mogadishu, is one of the largest Turkish military installations outside of its own borders. Hundreds of Turkish military personnel operate there, training Somali soldiers, conducting joint exercises, and building the capacity of a national army that is still struggling to contain the al-Shabaab insurgency. But Turkey's involvement goes far beyond military training. Turkish companies have taken over management of key Somali infrastructure. Turkish contractors built and now operate the Mogadishu airport and seaport, two of the most economically vital pieces of infrastructure in the country. Turkish aid organizations, many linked to the ruling AKP party, run schools, hospitals, and social programs that have earned Turkey enormous goodwill among ordinary Somalis. There's growing concern among Western analysts that this model of engagement, combining military training, infrastructure control, humanitarian aid, and political alignment, represents a sophisticated form of soft colonialism. Turkey doesn't occupy territory in the traditional sense. It embeds itself so deeply into a country's infrastructure and institutions that its influence becomes nearly impossible to remove. Some experts compare it to what Turkey has done in northern Syria, where it backed opposition forces, established a zone of control, and has remained entrenched for years, effectively governing a strip of foreign territory through proxy forces and direct military presence. A similar pattern is visible in Libya, where Turkish military intervention in 2020 turned the tide of the civil war in favor of the Tripoli-based government, and where Turkish forces and defense systems remain deployed to this day. Somalia fits this model perfectly. The central government in Mogadishu depends on Turkish military training to fight al-Shabaab. It depends on Turkish companies to run its airport and port. It depends on Turkish aid to provide basic services to its population. This creates a dependency loop that gives Ankara enormous leverage over Somali politics and enormous influence over who controls what on the Horn of Africa. When Israel recognized Somaliland, it didn't just challenge Somalia's territorial integrity. It challenged Turkey's entire strategic position in the region. If Somaliland gains international legitimacy, Somalia's claim over it weakens. And if Somaliland aligns with Israel and the broader Western-aligned bloc, Turkey loses a critical piece of its African chessboard. The reaction from Ankara and its allies was immediate and fierce. Both Turkey and Qatar condemned the recognition. Somalia recalled diplomatic engagement with Israel. The message was clear. Turkey views the Horn of Africa as its sphere of influence, and any challenge to that sphere will be met with resistance. Beneath the diplomatic maneuvering lies something even more consequential, an infrastructure war that will determine the physical architecture of global trade for the next half-century. The India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC, was announced at the G20 summit in New Delhi in September 2023 with enormous fanfare. It envisions a network of railways, shipping lanes, fiber optic cables, and energy pipelines connecting India to the Arabian Peninsula, then through Israel and onward to Greece, Cyprus, and Europe. The corridor is designed to be faster, more efficient, and more politically reliable than China's Belt and Road Initiative, which routes trade through Central Asia and, in some configurations, Oman through Turkey. Israel is not just a participant in IMEC. It is the geographic linchpin. The corridor's overland route passes directly through Israeli territory, which means that for the corridor to function, Israel must be stable, well-connected, and strategically secure. This explains why Israel has been so aggressively building alliances across the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea region. Every alliance it forges, every port it helps develop, every security agreement it signs is a brick in the foundation of this corridor. Somaliland's Berbera port fits directly into this logic. Located on the Gulf of Aden, Berbera is positioned to serve as a waypoint and security node for shipping moving between the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. The UAE's DP World has already invested heavily in upgrading the port, hence expanding its capacity and building a connected economic free zone. Some analysts believe that with further investment and security guarantees, Berbera could become a major alternative to Djibouti, which currently hosts military bases from the United States, China, France, Japan, and Italy, making it one of the most crowded and geopolitically complicated pieces of real estate on Earth. Turkey, meanwhile, has its own competing vision. Ankara has been pushing to position itself as the natural bridge between Asia and Europe, leveraging its geographic position straddling the two continents. Erdogan has championed massive infrastructure projects designed to reinforce this role, from the Istanbul Canal project to new rail links connecting Turkey to Central Asia. In this vision, trade flows through Turkey, not around it. In Somalia, Chak, with its Indian Ocean coastline and its potential as a Turkish naval foothold, is a key piece of that puzzle. This is the hidden dimension of the Somalia standoff. It's not just about diplomatic recognition or military bases. It's about which physical infrastructure network will carry the world's trade for the next generation. Will goods flow from India through the Gulf states and Israel to Europe, enriching the IMEC corridor and the nations that built it? Or will alternative routes through Turkey and its allies capture that trade flow? Trillions of dollars in commerce hang on the answer. Subscribe to NextBlueprint if you want to stay ahead of the infrastructure and engineering stories that are quietly reshaping the world. There is one more piece of this puzzle that brings everything into sharp focus, and it involves the Gaza Strip. In recent months, as international discussions about the future governance and security of Gaza have intensified, Turkey has pushed aggressively to be part of any post-conflict arrangement. Ankara has signaled its willingness to deploy Turkish troops as part of a peacekeeping or stabilization force in Gaza. The United States, at various points, has appeared open to the idea of Turkish involvement. Israel has rejected it categorically. The reasons for Israel's refusal become much clearer when you see the broader pattern. Israel's opposition is not simply about Gaza in isolation. It is about a consistent strategic principle. Wherever Turkey deploys military forces, it tends to stay. It tends to embed itself. And it tends to use that presence to expand its political influence through aligned networks, often Islamist in orientation. In northern Syria, Turkish forces entered in 2016 and have never left. They now effectively control a buffer zone along the border, backing proxy forces and influencing the political landscape deep inside Syrian territory. In Libya, Turkish military intervention was supposed to be temporary. Years later, Turkish forces and defense systems remain deployed. Some experts believe Turkey's engagement in Somalia follows the same template, and that any Turkish military presence in Gaza would follow the same trajectory. From Israel's perspective, allowing Turkish forces into Gaza would create an unprecedented threat. It would place the military forces of a hostile regional rival directly on Israel's border, embedded in a territory with deep-rooted militant networks, less than 50 miles from Tel Aviv. Once established, removing that presence would be diplomatically and militarily extraordinarily difficult. This is why Israel's recognition of Somaliland, its alliance with Greece and Cyprus, and its refusal to accept Turkish troops in Gaza are not separate policies. They are expressions of a single strategic doctrine, contain Turkish influence wherever it threatens Israeli interests or the broader Western-aligned order, block Turkey from gaining control of critical maritime choke points, and ensure that the emerging trade and security architecture of the region flows through Israeli-aligned networks, not Turkish ones. Critics argue that this approach risks escalating tensions with a NATO member and pushing Turkey further toward Russia, Iran, and China. There's a legitimate debate about whether Israel is overextending itself by trying to manage so many fronts simultaneously. But the current trajectory is unmistakable. Israel is behaving not as a small country focused on survival, but as a regional power actively shaping the strategic environment around it. Comment below if you think this strategy can hold, or if it's a risky bet that could backfire. In all of this strategic maneuvering, it's easy to forget that Somalia itself and its people are caught in the middle of a contest they didn't ask for and largely cannot control. Somalia's central government, based in Mogadishu, faces an almost impossible set of pressures. It is still fighting a grinding insurgency against al-Shabaab, one of the most dangerous militant organizations in Africa. It depends heavily on foreign military support, primarily from Turkey, the African Union's peacekeeping mission, and to a lesser extent the United States, just to maintain basic security in its own capital. Its institutions are fragile, its economy is shattered, and now its territorial integrity is being challenged by the recognition of Somaliland by a country that carries significant geopolitical weight. For Mogadishu, Turkey is not just an ally, it is a lifeline. Without Turkish military training, Somali security forces would be significantly weaker. Without Turkish-managed infrastructure, the country's main port and airport would likely deteriorate. Without Turkish humanitarian aid, basic services in many areas would collapse. This dependency gives Turkey enormous influence over Somali decision-making. And it means that Somalia's government has powerful incentives to align itself with Ankara's strategic interests, even when those interests may not perfectly align with Somalia's own long-term needs. Somaliland, meanwhile, faces its own dilemma. It has built something genuinely impressive, a democratic system in one of the world's most volatile regions. But its lack of international recognition has stunted its economic development, limited its access to international financial institutions, and left it vulnerable to the possibility that Somalia's government, backed by powerful allies, could one day attempt to reassert control over its territory. Israel's recognition offers a potential path to legitimacy and investment, but it also pulls Somaliland directly into a geopolitical confrontation that could bring new risks and new pressures. There's growing concern among regional analysts that the escalating competition between Israel and Turkey could destabilize the Horn of Africa further. If both sides continue to build up their positions, arming allies, investing in rival ports, and competing for influence among local power brokers, the risk of proxy conflict increases. The region has already seen decades of war, famine, and displacement. A new layer of great power competition could make recovery even more difficult. Some experts believe the best outcome would be a negotiated arrangement that allows Somaliland to gain greater autonomy and international engagement without triggering a full rupture with Mogadishu, while also establishing security frameworks in the Gulf of Aden that don't require choosing between rival blocs. But the current trajectory suggests that neither Israel nor Turkey is interested in compromise. Both see the Horn of Africa as a critical piece of a larger strategic puzzle, and neither is willing to cede ground. The people of Somalia and Somaliland, meanwhile, continue to navigate daily life in one of the most complex and challenging environments on Earth. Their futures are being shaped by decisions made in Jerusalem, Ankara, Abu Dhabi, and Washington. Whether those decisions ultimately bring stability and prosperity or deepen existing fractures remains one of the most consequential open questions in geopolitics today. Now step back and imagine the Horn of Africa 20 years from now. In one scenario, Somaliland has gained broad international recognition. Berbera Port has become a major commercial hub, and are integrated into the IMEC corridor, bustling with container ships moving goods between India and Europe. Israeli-aligned security infrastructure monitors the Strait, keeping shipping lanes open and stable. Somalia has gradually stabilized, finding its own path forward, perhaps even reaching an accommodation with Somaliland that allows both entities to prosper. The Red Sea corridor has become one of the most important trade routes in human history, rivaling the significance of the Suez Canal itself. In another scenario, the competition between Israel and Turkey has hardened into a permanent standoff. Both powers have entrenched military and intelligence assets across the region. Proxy tensions have flared into intermittent conflict, Somalia remains fragmented, its people caught between foreign patrons with competing agendas. Somaliland's recognition remains contested, leaving it in a geopolitical limbo that attracts investment from some quarters but instability from others. The Red Sea becomes not a highway of commerce but a zone of contested control, where shipping companies pay higher insurance premiums and global supply chains carry a permanent risk premium. The difference between these two futures may come down to decisions being made right now, in summit rooms and presidential palaces and military planning centers that most people will never see. It may come down to whether the engineers building ports in Berbera and the diplomats negotiating in Ankara and Jerusalem can find a framework that serves the interests of the people who actually live on the Horn of Africa, not just the powers competing to control it. What's certain is that this part of the world, so often dismissed and overlooked, is about to become one of the defining theaters of 21st century geopolitics. The infrastructure being laid today, the alliances being forged, the military positions being established. These will shape the flow of global trade, the balance of regional power, and the daily lives of millions of people for decades to come. This is not a story that ends with a single diplomatic announcement or a single military base. This is a story that is just beginning. If you want more stories about the technologies, infrastructure, and strategic engineering shaping our future, subscribe to NextBlueprint, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments.